Hi, I'm Tatum Dooley. I'm a writer and curator and the founder of Canadian Art Forecast. This is a new video series where Canadian Art Forecast has teamed up with Art Plus Public Unlimited to bring you behind the scenes look at Canadian artists' practices. Today, I'm joined by Joani Tremblay to chat about her practice, which investigates the perception of place through the relationship between landscape and its simulations and reproductions. Joani earned an MFA from Concordia University in 2017. Their work has been exhibited at venues across North America and internationally, including Harper's, New York and East Hampton, Marie-Laure Fleisch Gallery in Brussels, Interstate, Brooklyn, Zalucky Contemporary, Toronto, Pony Sugar, Stockholm, Projet, Pangée, Montreal, and 3331 Arts Chiyoda, Tokyo. Tremblay has participated in residencies in Los Angeles, Berlin, Tokyo. Tremblay and is currently in residence at the International Studio and Curatorial Program, Brooklyn. That's really quite the CV.
Oh, it adds up with years, right?
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask what your studio practice is like right now and what the curatorial program has been like in Brooklyn.
Yeah. So hi, Tatum. So nice to talk to you. So basically, what I've been doing in the studio, so basically I've always been interested in the idea of place because I grew up in the countryside of Quebec, and I would spend like every weekend, my summers at our cabin with, there was like no neighbors for miles. So I was alone in the landscape a lot, and there was no other kids around. So basically it was just like me like running around on beaches and forests and like rocks and stuff. So I think that's where it kind of like started. But basically, like you said, I think about place a lot. That's an idea, a concept that's in my practice, like kind of the center of my practice. And I paint, so I make paintings, but I paint from constructed ideas of places. So basically I create kind of assemblage, digital collages that I take from a variety of sources. So basically like from advertisement, postcards, social media, even like theme park attractions like Disneyland I went to, or mass communication, and also of course my own field research. And then I take that, create composite images, and then I translate them into painting. So basically I'm like, I would say like a digital tourist. That I take images and I collage them from those sources, and then I translate them into painting. So what I've been doing here at the residency, basically I finished up a solo show just before coming. So I worked on a solo show like all last summer and all through winter for a solo that opened at Harper's Chelsea Gallery in New York right now. So when I arrived, I did like one last painting, and then I started kind of new research. But there's a lot. So I'm really interested in architecture or like maybe like some type of, let's say like land that's really interesting to me, or sometimes like even landmark policies and such. But there's a lot of architecture right now that we cannot visit due to COVID. So I've been actually experimenting more on the painting side right now in the studio. So doing like more abstractions and looking at new brush marks and stuff like that.
Amazing. When you were chatting, I was reminded of this Twitter account called Liminal Spaces, and they share photographs of, just empty, kind of haunted looking spaces like a underground pool or an empty shopping center. And it kind of reminds me of your work, that there is something that feels almost unsettling about the architecture and its unreality. And so I was wondering where you find your source material and what are you drawn to when you are finding these architectural spaces?
That's really interesting. It's funny because a friend of mine here, when seeing the work, she was saying like that, she never knows if it's like just like a beautiful place where there just happens to be no one. So you're like there alone walking and it's very peaceful, or maybe it's just post-apocalyptic and there's just no humans anymore. And I think like that's kind of like sounds true to me. So like I said, I take it like through like social media. So I follow like a lot of Instagram architecture influencers, which is a thing. It's like beautiful people that goes to like interesting sites and takes photos of themselves, but to me it's like actually like really good research because they go to like really nice sites, but also I follow like a lot of architecture firms, design firms, things like that, and also I look at advertisement, like I said, postcard, etc. So sometimes I have like a subject that's very precise, like let's say at an exhibition that was like thinking about Arcasenti, which is a micro city in Arizona. So I did a lot of research, like very specifically about how Arizona is portrayed in like in advertisement and such. But I also do, I find my source material also by doing field research. So I used to go to places, like not so much this year, but I used to go to places and basically like take photographs, but I don't really work from my own photographs usually. It's more like I like to usually do research and then go to the place to kind of have a feeling of it. And then it comes out in different ways in the work.
Do you have a favorite place that you visited?
I really love the desert. So basically like all the Southwest, so Arizona, New Mexico, also the desert around Joshua Tree, like around LA kind of thing, but outside of LA. So I'm going actually next month to Palm Spring and Joshua Tree, and then we're driving through Arizona and New Mexico and doing all that road trip. I've been fully vaccinated, so
That's so nice.
yeah. Yeah.
I know that in your process that you do multiple renderings and, you know, Photoshop or digital renderings and moving things around. And you also mentioned the research that you're continuously doing. I am wondering how that process finds its way into the work and the end and the themes that you're working with and the investigations of architecture, if they replicate each other in any way.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So basically, the kind of method I'm using between the digital collage and painting, for me, I would say that is a way also to engage critically with the transformation of our contemporary visual culture. So basically, you know, we see painting IRL in galleries or museums, but we also mostly see them on Instagram or social media. So I'm kind of thinking about that through making the work as well. So basically, I think like going through digital collage painting to me is thinking about the questions of visual literacy, like how images are made, looked at, considered, analyzed, internalized. But because I'm interested also about the cultural idea of place, so like how it's built through an accumulation of various sources. So basically I'm thinking a lot about the expanding practice of tourism. So basically like an anxious practice of consumption. So how, for example, we all have an idea of what California is and how it's portrayed. Or for example, like, you know, I don't remember the name, but this beach in Thailand that basically became like super famous on Instagram, and now there's a lineup of people like always going there, and it's actually a problem. So there's kind of this aspect of tourism too that I think of it. And you know, my paintings are like on vertical mode; they're not on landscape mode, and I think you know, I think it's not a surprise that they're actually like almost square. They're like basically the typical image format of Instagram usually. And I think that's kind of a link that a lot of painters do. I think we see more vertical paintings now than horizontal. And I think there's just like a link there that we have basically. Yeah.
I think you're right. I even read something, you know, it was like an Instagram marketing post where people said, when you're posting on Instagram, you shouldn't use a square or a horizontal. You should always do vertical as long as possible. So it takes up the most attention in people's feeds. And I was like, how I've never really thought about the attention, what is grabbing our visual attention on Instagram in such a articulated way. But
Yeah,
yeah,
but
that's
I think we're like so used to it now to see, I don't know, images that way that um it's just like, I think it's subconscious also in a way, like it wasn't, it's more something I realized afterwards. Like for me also doing vertical work was to I've been doing it before I was posting on Instagram, but it was like also to kind of get away from the typical landscape like horizontal shape that refers to me too much of the group of seven and such a things. But I think now that we're so used to it, like when it's like that kind of like rectangle, almost square vertical, it just like feels so right when we see it. Just like, oh yeah, I feel comfortable. Like this is a good shape.
do you
Yeah.
think it's different for viewers to look at your work online where it is flattened as if it was a PDF or JPEG versus looking at it in real life at a show?
Yeah, I think it's very different. It's a comment I add a lot at the show, actually, through the opening or whenever I would meet people there. I think, painting when it's photographed, not only does it like, yes, make it super flattened, so it does make it more like designy, like it looks more like a graphic design a bit because it makes everything so simple. You don't see details, you don't see texture. It's just like makes like basically the main forms, the main shapes in photograph. And also, like photos of them are always hyper saturated, so they look like super saturated, but in reality they're not as saturated. There's way more subtlety to the colors. And also like for this show in particular, actually like work a lot with the brush marks. So when you see it, there's like different really texture on the work that you cannot see through a photograph.
Mm-hmm. So another question I had was what the relationship to memory of architecture or a specific place is there in your work. When I look at them, I mean, it does feel like they're inciting a very vague memory or even a memory of a dream. The architecture of my dreams is very distinct. It's one of the things I always remember. And so, yes, what are you thinking about in terms of memory, or is that even a concern for you?
Yeah, I would say so. I'm very like basically because I'm so interested in places and it's like my main idea. To me, architecture and like even theories of architecture always been like such a good resource because basically architects think about place, whenever they build a site. So I'm not sure about memories, but for example, like sometimes I make exhibition that reflects on specific architectural site. Like for example, the exhibition I made that was saying about the micro city of Arcosanti in Arizona in 2019, which was very like a real specific place. But then of course I didn't portray that in a realistic way, but I more like thought about like what it meant to be there when I did my research, etc. But sometimes also I don't represent like fixed or legible locations. Sometimes it's like more prompt by full freedom to roam in the unknown, geographically or imaginatively. So maybe that would be like more, I would say like maybe the link with the dream. So then like maybe like the physical space I think becomes more psychic spaces, sorry. So I think like maybe that would be kind of the conversation between the two that I'm interested in. And I think like I use abstraction in my work too with figuration. And I think to me abstraction, abstracted like places like really linked to that more like psychological aspect of place. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, and as you say that, I was like, maybe the word isn't memory, it's a feeling, just like a sense of
Yeah,
being in the world and walking, or even, yeah, like, is that, yeah.
definitely. That's funny you say that. I had like actually an exhibition text a couple of years ago that was talking about that because like I was saying, like for me, like field research is to go at a place, but it's not so much like taking photographs as a source material. It's really to get that feeling of the place to after like think about, like, for example, I wanted to make a painting about like thinking about like how the sky in Paris is so has like that gray tint, like even when it's sunny, that it makes everything like this beautiful gray beige. It feels like there's kind of a lens. Or even, you know, like in California, that everything's like so like sun washed, like it's like everything's kind of bleached when you look outside. Like the quality of light basically is so different. Yeah, and the feeling, let's say in Arcosenti in Arizona, the feeling of that place for me was really kind of unsettling. It was like a beautiful utopia from the 70s. So that means like all made of concrete, but that is really like kind of a ruin of it. But yet people are still living there, but you feel you're living on this old utopia of someone else. Like it's just an utopia for the founder who died now. Like it's an utopia for no one else. So it's kind of like a feeling of a place. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about the specific light in places, I thought, is this like, you know, is longitude and latitude, like what is the geography that influences the light in certain places and how we very quickly can pick up on that? Do you know if there is a like geographical explanation to that?
That's so funny you say that. I was listening to this podcast recently about architecture, and I'm like, actually I ordered the book and I started reading it. The book is Architecture Beyond Experience by Michael Benedict. Mm-hmm. And it does talk about how longitude and latitude, like there is a difference like in the quality of light. And he was talking about like how, like, yes, like maybe like the smog, for example, like of LA. So maybe like, you know, the sun going through that smog all the time, that gives this kind of quality of light. But he was talking about the different greens, which I thought was so interesting. So basically, just because of the light that hits the plants differently, like the greens of the leaves are like very different. So you could like kind of technically know where you are just by looking at the flora, basically, and the color of the flora.
How do you go about mixing colors for your paintings?
I actually like mix them really carefully. It takes me like, I would say like half a day usually before like painting. So I work like section by section, and let's say today I'm gonna paint this section. I mix for like, around half a day from like really the base color. So I mix all my color. It's really rare I use pre-mixed colors, because it's always like, exactly, like I want it to be like, oh, that tint of gray a little bit in the, let's say like in the green, it's like slightly gray or like slightly it's very specific for the mood of the painting, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In your most recent show at Harper's, The Whole Time the Sun, were you looking at a specific place, or was that more about capturing a feeling, or, you know, sunlight? Or
for that show, actually, it was quite different. So what happened is that I was walking with my friend Sarah Burgogne, who's a poet, in Montreal last summer, and then she was telling me that she wrote this poetry book, which now just came out, actually, like actually it's coming out next week, and it's called Because the Sun. And basically it's a book of poetry inspired by the role and metaphor of the sun in Albert Camus' The Stranger. And she wanted to take up like the relentless heat of the sun and the potential for transference. So like how like the sun kind of makes him kill that guy in the book, or how the sun is so intense on his head at his mom's funeral that he's not really crying. So, and it's a subject actually I tried to paint many years ago, but I couldn't. It just didn't work out. Like, I guess because I was too first degree, like I was literally trying to paint a sun and it wasn't working. Mm-hmm. So basically I was very lucky, and she just like gave me the book that was not published yet. And I thought it was so inspiring that basically was the base for the exhibition, or poems. So for the exhibition, it's not an illustration of each poem, but it's more thinking through the idea of the sun, like she did. So like a transference. So there's no sun painted, but it's the light that's different. So I was more thinking about, like, for example, there's one painting that I'm thinking like, okay, let's say like you're in a wheat field and it's like August and it's like super, super warm. So the wheat field is like very soft and beautiful, but it's like tapping on your head and you have no shade. So I was thinking more like about specific places like that. Another one is like you're in the desert and you don't see the sky at all because there's like a sandstorm. And then again, you're looking for shade, but there's like this shade that's like made of plexiglass, so it's full of sun. You know, like in Montreal on Saint-Hubert Street, we have this like shading made of plexiglass, which is like basically useless. I mean, it's good for rain, but so I was thinking more about like, yeah, like kind of like how our surroundings influences how we feel, like our behavior. So basically, like in the same line of thought as Guy Debord, like in psychogéographie kind of thing.
Is there an ominous thread throughout them then?
Yeah, it's all like different situation that you cannot escape the sun, cannot escape the heat, basically. And they're all in conversation with each other. And there is this kind of beauty to it, like nature has beauty, but there's also this violence to it because heat can be quite intense and even, you know, violence at times. So there's like one painting that's literally thinking about like the violence of the sun basically on you. And there is again this kind of post-apocalyptic feel to it because like, yeah, it's beautiful, but you're kind of stuck in there with the sun and like shining on you too hard. And in the show, there's also 5 selected poems excerpt that I selected with Sarah, and that you can basically like read it while looking at the work. And for example, like one of them is literally a poem about how to, what to do in a heat stroke. So like different ways to like lower your temperature, which again, I think goes well with what you just said. Yeah.
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 Maybe I can just read a couple excerpts for people. So there's one, oh, it's like hard to even choose. A small abstraction is the addition of violence. Curve yourself into it. You are selling vastness to the sun. Architecture helps. The poem is architectural. When you read it, it changes the atmosphere of the painting. Approach the light slantwise, and you will have many suns on the tip of your tongue. And then you have corresponding paintings in the footnotes that people can then look at.
Yeah, which is basically, I mean, she's such a genius in poetry. Basically, like I said, we're having this conversation. And so when I read it, like I knew exactly from which painting that we were talking about, that she basically summed up, you know, a 5-minute discussion on a painting into like one small, beautiful sentence. So we talked together about like the footnote that basically, like, because like I was telling her, like, we know which painting we're talking about, but for the viewers, they probably won't. So it's kind of nice to have those footnotes to kind of reference that conversation.
What other scholars or texts inspire your practice?
So besides Sarah, and I love dearly, I'm a huge fan of Rebecca Solnit. So I read so many of her books, but my favorite one is A Field Guide to Getting Lost, or also Wanderlust, The Story of Walking, which is so helpful. And then I'm reading right now Architecture Beyond Experience, like I was saying, of Michael Benedict. And I'm also reading Donald Judd's collection of writing and interviews right now, because I'm looking into buying land in the desert to create a studio and to basically make the land kind of a sanctuary, but like invite artists as well. And I'm really interested into like how Donald Judd basically was able to create like a live work environment. Like for example, his apartment in New York that had other artists work, but that basically that's where you work, but was also a continual exhibition, a perpetual exhibition space. So I'm thinking a lot about like building habitats, experiences, and how to bring painting into that as well. So I make a bit of sculpture, but I'm thinking of maybe making more architecture for the paintings. So that's what I'm reading and thinking a lot about people that lives in the desert and how they live in it. So like Judy Chicago, that's in New Mexico, Donald Judd, James Turrell, Angus Martin also, and Angus Pelton a lot. So that's like what I'm looking at right now.
It's interesting to go from like rural Quebec to the desert. They seem as if they couldn't be any more different, but perhaps I'm wrong in thinking that. I'm sure there are similarities maybe in the solitude or like the sounds. When was the first time you went to the desert, and what draws you so strongly to wanting to live there?
When was it? I think like it was maybe 2016 or something. I think to me, like it's funny because there's so many, like the artists I just named, or there's so many artists that live there. I think it's kind of like a spiritual event when you go to the desert. It's just like there's no other place on earth that feels like it. I don't know if it's the vastness of the sky or the colors that are so different, but there is like definitely like some weird energy that basically I just fell in love with it, and that's where I want to be. Like, so most of the time, like maybe not all year, but like working between New York and there would be kind of the dream. To extreme the intensity and the intense solitude, basically. Yeah.
Do you find that those artists make their way into your art at all?
Yeah, definitely somehow. I think, all art is often, influenced by so many artists next to us or before us. And I think definitely they're there. Like for me, I was looking more for this show. I think like we can see a little more, there's some references. So for example, like one of the painting references one of James Turrell's voyons, like the sculpture of like basically the hole in the sky with the light. So he references that. There's like some reference here and there. The bench in the exhibition is actually a reference to Agnes Martin has a museum in Taos, New Mexico. Part of the museum, that's a room that she designed for painting, and she has benches in the middle that are yellow of Donald Judd. So it was like there's a bench in the exhibition that's a reference to that. So there's like little references here and there for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And it's kind of maybe some people pick up on it right away, and then otherwise it's a little bit of a secret for you.
Yeah, which is fun. I love that. I love when I see shows and I'm like, oh, I know what you're doing there. I know the reference. And it's kind of an extra add-on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The final thing that I wanted to talk to you about was that, as when I read out your CV, is that you've shown all over the world, in New York, Tokyo, Berlin, Brussels, Stockholm. As a Canadian artist, how did you get your work out there? And what would you say to an emerging artist that wanted to follow in those exhibition footsteps?
Yeah, which is a great question. So basically, I would say to investigate like how your work is in conversation with the different communities. So basically like what are the artists like, are the artists like you're in love with? And basically, if they all happen to be in Berlin, it would be probably a good idea to go there for a little bit and kind of hang out and build your community. So for me, it was a lot of like painters in New York that I really love. So I came here more. I decided to kind of put my energy more into like specific places. So residencies are amazing for that too. So I decided to do residencies more specifically, let's say here in New York, to kind of build my community. And I would say like also to be like just really nice and really easy to work with, because that goes such a long way. People don't have time for people that are not super nice. Like, the art world is such a small place that we all know each other. And then to maybe work with galleries that do good art fairs, because good art fairs, like let's say like NADA Miami or well, it used to be Nada New York, but let's say like there's a bunch of really good ones. That's a good way for the people to see your work that is not maybe you know, in the community that you're used to. And obviously like Instagram is also a really good way to meet people that are not necessarily in your city.
Yeah, I mean, I echo all of that. Those are similar advice when people talk to me about writing. It's to be nice and to be reliable. I think those are
Yeah,
very important, and so I
that's
like to
true.
get them, and they get overlooked.
Yeah, definitely. And to be friendly, I guess, like, you know, most people are very friendly. And when I first started, let's say I did a residency in LA, I would not only just do the residency, but I would actually, you know, DM some artists I really love from LA and ask kindly if we could do a studio visit. And I would go to their studio and I would be very generous with my time and very generous, you know, with the community. And then you build friends and make friends. And that's how I think it works.
Yeah, the power of the DM. Most of my friends now I met by DMing them and saying, "I love your work. Can we get a coffee?"
Yeah. And usually if you love the work of someone, you probably have some things in common.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nice to hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me, and congratulations on your show at Harper's. It looks beautiful.
Thank you so much, Tatum. It was so good to catch up with you.